Before we get into this episode, there's something that might be of interest that I wanted to tell you about. Scene and Heard, who run this podcast, have been asked by Scotland Food and Drink to undertake a strategic review of the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards. Now, these Excellence Awards have been going for almost 20 years and are a huge mainstay of the food and drink sector. But it's time to ensure that they're still relevant. So if you have ever been involved in the Scotland Food and Drink Excellence Awards, or even if you've ever had an opinion about them, we would love for you, please, to complete our survey. So if you go to the On Farm Twitter, which is at @on_farm UK, and click the link in the bio, there will be a tab in there that will take you to the survey, and it should only take you a very short while to complete, but we would be enormously grateful.
Cornish crab salad on lemon blini, pressed duck terrine with fruit chutney, a roulade of goat's cheese with caramelised walnuts, Scottish smoked salmon on beetroot blini. All of these ingredients, or most of them anyway, carefully sourced from Royal Warrant holding companies, including British ingredients.
So that was Hugh Edwards from BBC News, running viewers through the wedding day menu at Prince William and Kate Middleton's big day. And Scottish salmon was very much centre stage. Not only is it a sought-after Royal Warrant and a prestigious Label Rouge from France, but salmon is also the UK's biggest food export. Last time we spoke with 3 guests working in the early days to talk about how the pioneers set up Scottish salmon farming. If you've not heard that episode, go back and check it out. It's a great listen and there's some brilliant stories. Today though, we're looking at how technology has developed the industry in recent years and how Scottish salmon is making changes towards farming more sustainably. Coming up, we'll have Clara McGee, a trainee manager on a fish farm on the Isle of Rum. We'll also have Steve Bracken back with us, and he worked in the industry for 40 years. Later, we'll have cleaner fish expert Lewis Bennett and Ewan Leslie, an engineer who's been working on ways to recycle fish waste from the bottom of the nets. So, lots to get our teeth into in this episode, which is in partnership again with the Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation. And here to guide us through it all is on-farm producer Jac Phillimore.
Welcome Clara McGee and Steve Bracken. Let's start with you, Clara. When and how did you get into fish farming?
Back in 2018, I decided to have a bit of a career change. So I came from a background in environment and sustainability. I did my first degree in sustainable development way back in 2013, I think. Worked for a few years in environmental consulting, and then I decided that I fancied a change. And I'd always been interested in fish farming, in sustainable food production, the marine environment, and the west coast of Scotland. So I went back to university, did a master's in sustainable aquaculture, and then ended up working for Maui on the Isle of Muck as a farm technician in 2018. So yeah, it was a bit of a curveball career change, but one that I'm glad that I made, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So we live for 2 weeks on the island. We travel out to site every day by boat. We work 12-hour days, Monday to Friday, and 10 hours on weekends. And then you get 2 weeks off every month, which is nice. So I travel home to Uist, which is where I stay when I'm off.
And can you describe a typical day for us?
In fish farming, no 2 days are the same, and that's one of the reasons that I love it. So, I mean, I guess working with any animal, every day is different, and you're really at their will. We feed our fish every day. That's one of, if not the most important job that we do. And we start every day by doing environmental checks. So we check our water for plankton and zooplankton and general environmental parameters. We'll do just general maintenance on the barge and our nets. We'll do net washing in the summer season. And then if we're ever doing treatments or harvest, that's obviously sort of factored in throughout the cycle. So yeah, it's a very varied job, and one that you have to turn your hand to many different things, but that keeps things interesting, and it's something that I really enjoy about it.
Quite a different life to environmental consultancy. Tell me what are the things you love about that change, and what are the challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I've got used to it now, but it was a bit of a shock to the system because I went from a kind of Monday to Friday, 9 till 5, having a diary with meetings scheduled and deadlines that had to be done by certain times, and you knew exactly what you were going to be doing every day. And then you go to fish farming and plans change like the wind, and you think you know what you're doing, but then the next hour, everything's different. That took a bit of an adjustment, but you kind of get used to it. And I think to be in the industry, particularly in production, you do have to be very flexible and willing to adapt to both the environment and just situational changes. So yeah, it was a change, but I'm far happier now than I was sitting in an office looking at a computer, that's for sure.
In the first episode, we started to hear, well, Steve was explaining to us the scale of the operation when he first started out. And I wanted to get a sense of how large that's grown now. Can you explain the sort of scale of it to us?
Yeah, I think the scale of it is something that's very difficult to comprehend if you're not in fish farming. Out on Rum, we have 12 pens that are 120 meter circular pens. So they're big. We have at the moment just under 900,000 fish. We have a biomass of up to 2,500 tonnes that we can have on site at any time. We have a feed barge that holds 400 tonnes of feed, and every day we could be feed. At the moment, we're feeding about 8 or 9 tonnes of feed a day. So the numbers are big. It's a huge scale operation, and that's just one site. In Scotland, there's many sites in Maui, there's many companies. So it's big numbers. And I think that's hard for the public to understand. Being at sea and underwater, it's hard to get your head around. But yeah, it's logistical, not just on one site, but then you're trying to fit one site into the whole company. So feed deliveries have to be planned well in advance to make sure that you don't run out of feed or that you never have too much feed. Then you've got harvests that need to be coordinated based on fish sizes of all the different farms up and down the west coast of Scotland. So yeah, logistically, it's a bit of a brain frazzles you a little bit, but you've got a great team of people working in the company that all have their unique role, and somehow it manages to keep ticking over very well.
And presumably you've got to get vets from the mainland or visits, and you've got bad weather to contend with. You're offshore.
Yeah, for us, I think those out where we are on Rum, I would say those elements of it are more challenging than maybe some sites. Like you say, boats are the only way we can get out to Rum. So we see our vets regularly, we get divers in routinely, and we also have, a number of contractors and that kind of thing. But yeah, the only way we can get them is from collection from either Malig or Armadale on Skye. So that's just another element of logistics that we need to factor in that maybe other sites don't. But it makes it work. I mean, the weather is a big issue, hopefully not at this time of year, but in the winter it can be. But you just kind of got to roll with the punches, and that's the nature of where we are, really.
So I wanted to come on to looking at how far the technology has come. So I'd like to take you back, Steve, and for you to talk us through how on earth you were counting fish, collecting fish, all these sort of nuts and bolts of it, and then look at how that's done today.
Well, when I started in 1977, fish counting was a big problem. You were counting fish manually, so you were netting them out and using clicker counters to count them. And of course they would rust up or you'd lose them or whatever. So the idea came up of, why don't we film the fish passing from one side of a pen to another? And this was done with the resources of Unilever, who put a lot of time, money and effort into trying to solve this problem. So the idea was that we had a mini countryman. Now, a mini countryman then is about 20 times smaller than the ones that we have today. So it was a very small car. And what we did was we mounted an aluminium scaffold tower out of the windows in the back of the car, and then perched on the top of it, we put a video camera. So that was all very good and well, and then filled it with batteries to power the video recording equipment, which was all reel-to-reel back then, no cassettes. And then the Mini was moved onto a raft, and the raft was then pushed out to the farm and moored up against the pens. So the idea was that, you would crowd the fish to one side, and then as they passed over the centre, you would film them, just going over a few at a time. Now, again, all very good and well, but this was weather dependent. it wasn't the most stable platform to have your car on, and could be kind of nauseating if you're sitting inside it and you're rocking about in this thing. So the challenge was to do this as accurately as you could. And then at the end of the day, when you'd counted your pens, you had to go home and then count the fish on the reel-to-reel video recording. So that was a job you tended to find you could delegate. Hopefully you didn't have to do that yourself. But of course everybody was wanting to know the number of fish in the pen, and so it had to be done pretty quickly.
I mean, it must have taken hours. I mean, how many fish are you counting? How long did that take you?
Well, unlike Clara's pens, I mean, we had very few fish in them, 1,000 or 2,000, something like that. But it was the rate of flow of getting these fish to cross the pen, and you were relying on one of your team to just gently move them across. And if too many came, you were, how am I going to count this lot? And you couldn't start again, you just had to go with it, go with the flow. So yes, it was very time consuming. And I have to say, at the end of all of that, it really wasn't that accurate. Now, the idea was fantastic, that people were putting a lot of thought into how do we solve this problem of counting fish. And it was groundbreaking, and I think it was a good start on getting people to think, how do we do this more accurately and more reliably? Again, today there are some fantastic companies out there producing, world-class equipment for this kind of job.
I'm just chuckling because I drive a Mini Countryman, and I'm just imagining it stuck in a pen scaffolding. But yeah, things have moved on a lot. We're very fortunate that we don't have to go through that now. So when our smolts come to sea, they're counted sort of onto the wellboat and counted off the wellboat. So our fish come, they're discharged into the pen from the wellboat. We're given a piece of paper, and on that will tell you have got X amount of fish in your pen, an average weight of this. And, as Steve mentioned, there's companies now that are designing incredible pieces of kit that I certainly can't profess to understand how they do it, but we don't have any of that laborious work that Steve had back in the day.
And are you dealing with the harvest of them? I mean, you're having to select on size, presumably still. Explain how that's done.
Well, so when your fish come to sea, you know how many fish you have in a pen, you know your average weight. And then every day when we feed our fish, we know how much each individual pen is eating. We enter that into an online system, and that sort of every day generates what the average size in the pen will be based on the amount of feed that you've given in. So over time, you can, your fish increase on size, you can monitor it through this software. And then when they start getting to harvestable size, you would then start taking fish out of pens. So yeah, I mean, there's a logistics team that work out all of our harvests across the company, and they're trying to marry what customers need in different parts of the world, or supermarkets in this country need, with what we have in the sea at any one time. We're not harvesting at the moment. Our fish are still too small, but we hopefully will be sometime later on this summer, and that's an exciting time when you start sending your fish off. It's quite a proud moment when you've grown them onto that stage. So looking forward to it.
Steve, tell us a bit about how you were catching and selecting fish based on size yourselves.
Yeah, that was another challenge as well. So for us, when it came to harvest the fish, we had to do this all by hand. So the fish were hand netted. And the way that we did it was we would bring a pen of fish into a floating pontoon at the side of the loch, and then we would kneel on a carpet, and then there would be somebody, maybe one person, two people possibly, netting out the fish onto the carpet, where there were perhaps 3 or 4 guys who would kill the fish. Once they were stunned, you would put them into ice bins, and they'd be taken away to the processing plant.
It sounds like the industry is constantly looking at ways to build on and improve and take advantage of new technologies. There have been quite a lot of challenges for the industry along the way and now. So let's have a look at those challenges facing the industry in recent years. A big challenge throughout farming has been lice. And last week I met Lewis Bennett, who works at Loch Duart on cleaner fish.
See there, fish are flapping around the net, so I'll count these out nice and quick.
Cleaner fish are a micro-species of fish that we use within the pens to naturally keep lice levels under control from the salmon. So these are a fish that we either farm or they're a fish that we capture from the wild. They are native to the UK in all respects. We input them to the salmon pens, usually in the late spring, summer period, and then these fish will naturally learn to live with the salmon. We provide all of the habitat for them so that they're nice and safe. We provide feed, and these fish naturally eat the lice off the salmon over a period of time. If done correctly, they should keep the lice levels at zero all the way through production cycle until harvest. It's not an easy target to hit. We sometimes do make it look a little bit easy, and I think sometimes we do just get used to the fact that these results do come to us quite naturally. But again, it is something we have to work on, and it is something you have to be on top of. You know, the results can be achieved in these systems. It is just a case of doing everything in the correct order and getting the RAS in nice and quickly. The quicker you can get them in, the quicker you'll hold the numbers at zero, and they'll stay that way.
And is that the reason why cleaner fish didn't work before, do you think, in the 90s?
Cleaner fish didn't work for us initially in the way that they do now, simply because we didn't have this knowledge. In many ways, we weren't able to get the fish stock quick enough. So because we weren't able to get the fish quick enough, we couldn't get them into the sites in the period of, let's say May or June. We were getting them in sort of July, August, by which time you're at the height of the summer. Lice are going to grow quicker. Their life stage will go from being the smallest to the largest in the space of 7 days. And so you're almost putting too much pressure on the cleaner fish. Their job, first thing, you've taken them in from the hatchery, you put them in there from the wild. They've got to settle in. No animal, no creature on earth will behave properly in the correct manner if it's thrown into an alien environment. So because of that, we were putting a lot of pressure on those fish where we put them in the pen and, people wanted the result within 2 or 3 weeks. And the fact is, it probably took them 2 or 3 weeks to settle in. And then you're going to expect them to exhibit that behaviour you want them to exhibit, which is grazing on the lice from that point. And because we weren't getting those results, people were thinking it doesn't work, or they're not working, or they're not going to work. And it's like, no, it's just very simply, those fish have got to go through a process to get to the point where they're then happy. In terms of new stuff that we're working on and things that we're always trying to progress on, feed is one of them. Changing the diet for seasons. Different diets. Do we need to present the diet differently? Do we need to put the fish in at a different period of the year? Do we need to put them in later or earlier? Can we put less fish in, which is something over the years we have done with cleaner fish. We've slowly dropped the percentage back to getting the same efficiency and the same lice results, but with less fish. Hides is probably the biggest one. Now, hides are the habitat that we put in the salmon pens to make sure that the fish have somewhere to hide, rest, anywhere that they want to sit, rather than sitting on the bases of the net or just consistently swimming around the pen, which is energy exertion. So this year we will be trialling about 6 different hide systems, 2 or 3 of them specific to the winter, to make sure that we can improve the survival from November to sort of beginning of April. And also just making sure that the habitat that we're providing suits the wrasse as well as the lungfish. We are going to be tagging wrasse wild and farmed, and we're going to be tagging salmon to see what the behaviour suggests. Is this where the salmon come to the wrasse to get cleaned, or do the wrasse go to the salmon, or is it a little bit of both? This behaviour that we're going to see will also allow us to work out where the hides need to be, what design do they need to be, where do we have the feed, is it something that all the fish are getting, or is it something we need to move to a different position? So there's a lot of things that project is going to bring to our production and make known to us for our knowledge retention for the future.
That was Lewis Bennett from Loch Duart talking about a solution of using cleaner fish to keep on top of lice in the farms. Hopefully that sort of solution is reducing the impact that farming has on the environment, reducing use of chemicals and things like that.
So I think there's a lot of misconceptions around fish farming, particularly when it comes to medicinal treatments. I think it's important to remember that at the end of the day, we're farmers and we rely upon our environment for what we do, just like sheep farmers do and pig farmers and chicken farmers, we need the environment to do what we do. And it's important, therefore, for us to look after it as best we can. And from our point of view, prevention is always better than treatment. So in terms of lice, we use cleaner fish. We use another method called lice skirts, which are just sort of creating a bit of a barrier at the top 5 to 6 meters of the pen to stop lice getting into the pen. So we do all of these things to try and minimize lice being an issue, but inevitably it can happen. They're a naturally occurring parasite in the wild, and that's just something that we have to deal with as best we can. Sometimes when I get asked by friends and family about the lice issue, I try to liken it to sheep. Sheep get maggots, those sheep form maggots. It's the same thing. It is a naturally occurring parasite that affects our stock. And at the end of the day, the welfare of our stock is the number one priority. We have a suite of treatments that we use, not just medicinal. So we use fresh water baths as well for lice treatments. We have a number of mechanical treatments. And then if we have to, the last option would be medicinal. It's not something that we do super regularly, but at the end of the day, the fish are our number one priority. The industry is continually evolving. We do have an awful lot of challenges, that's for sure. I don't think we have all the answers. I don't think any fish farmer would profess that it's a perfect industry, but it's a lot better than I think a lot of people think it is. And we're always doing our best and trying to improve. And that's something I like about it, is that there are challenges, but we need people to overcome these and come up with new solutions. With freshwater, there's two ways of going about it. There is, we can use natural freshwater that we do, I suppose, harvest from natural streams or rivers. But now we actually have 2 large well boats in the company that can produce their own freshwater through reverse osmosis. So they can take water on board, seawater on board, and through, again, some incredibly clever technology that someone has designed, they can change that salt water into fresh water. So again, that's another bonus for us. We don't have to rely on naturally produced fresh water. So yeah, there's different, these things are always evolving. It's incredible what new technologies are coming through.
Looking back to the early days of feeding fish, when it was very basic and it was just fish meal, blocks of blue whiting and ice basically to make up a simple pelleted diet. The feed industry has moved on enormously and it's hugely sophisticated now. So much so that from where we were in the 70s and 80s with very, very high marine ingredient content in the feed, this has dropped down dramatically.
And that wasn't just catching fish. This was also byproduct of human consumption of fish. So taking fish guts and... Yeah, from processing, you're using all the offcuts there. And so that's been a huge benefit. So it's been looked at in a very sort of practical way and I think very, very wisely to make best use of these raw materials. But I think that along with the change in the recipes, if you like, the method of feeding also has changed dramatically, because thinking back on it, you're looking into a pen of fish, you just didn't know what they were eating and what they weren't eating. So we did have waste, that was a fact. But now, with the monitoring equipment that exists, that are on these feed barges today, you're controlling that so precisely. So from the early days of food conversion ratios maybe being 1.3, 1.4 plus, it's down now to 1 to 1.1 perhaps. Again, Clara would be able to say better. So the improvements there, not just in the diets, the reduction in fish meal, fish ingredients, marine ingredients, and the inclusion of plant materials, plus the feeding methods have contributed hugely, I think, to a reduction in environmental impact. Comparing that to other forms of farming, that conversion rate that's pretty amazing, really, as a statistic. 1.1 kilos in and 1 out. I mean, that's efficient protein farming.
It's hugely efficient, but as I say, a lot of it is, it's primarily down to the change in the feeds themselves, but also in the administration of the feed to the fish. It's hugely precise. And with the monitoring equipment that we have today on the farms, it is just chalk and cheese. There's no comparison. I mean, we were flying blind.
I believe as an industry, not just as a company, but as an industry in Scotland, there has been a commitment to only source 100% sustainably accredited feed ingredients going forward. I know a large number, if not most of them already are. And, as Steve said, there has been a move away from fish oil and fish meal to more plant-based ingredients. But again, there's a lot of research going into other novel ingredients, including insects as a form of protein. So it's again, feeding is the biggest cost. As a fish farmer, it's your biggest cost. You want to make it as efficient as you can do, and as Steve said, the equipment that we use now is unbelievable. We have cameras in the water so we can watch the fish feeding. We have cameras above the water, so we can closely monitor every pen individually. We can go up and down in the pen at different depths, and now there's also technology that has pellet recognition, so the cameras themselves can detect pellets falling past, and then they would automatically reduce the rate going into that pen. So there's a huge drive to make feeding more efficient than it already is. But I think we're doing a very good job at the moment, for sure. As an industry, we also have a sustainability charter that came out, I think it was at the end of 2020 or early 2021, titled A Better Future for Us All. So that was really led by the SSPO, the Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation, and it's just a sort of united front from all bodies in the industry to have a more sustainable future and sign up to a number of commitments, including sustainable feed ingredients, supporting local communities and affordable housing on the West Coast, which is really important, I think. And I think the Scottish salmon industry does a huge amount already in their communities. But yeah, it's good just to see the industry as a whole coming together and making that commitment for sustainability.
In the farms, you've got these huge areas, huge pens, and there have been criticisms levied at the industry about the waste that lies at the bottom. Obviously, that's reducing with more effective feeding, but you do inevitably have the fish excrement there. I caught up with an engineer working on cutting-edge solutions to put fish excrement to good use.
My name is Ewan Leslie. I'm currently Engineering Manager for Freshwater Division of Scottish Sea Farms, based out of Barcaldine near Open. From Barcaldine, we take eggs in and produce juvenile smolts, which then go to sea from the hatchery. Part of this is looking after the RAS system, which is mechanical, electrical pumps, filters, which we take the water from the fish tanks through the filters. And from the filters, the waste from there, feed waste excrement from the fish themselves, is then transferred to a sludge holding tank. From that holding tank, we then create a sludge, which becomes a commodity, shall we say, where we can actually use it to go to land injection so as a fertiliser for farmers in the East Coast. And before it would have to go to a disposal site. So we decided that wasn't the way to go. The amount we're going to produce, we would take it a different route. When I worked at the processing plants, we had fish waste from there, but a different type of waste. It was from parts of fish when the fish were cut up. And we had sludge produced from there as well, from the bloods and oils from the fish. So the background was there already, but that was going to an AD plant to create electricity. So when we looked at building this site for a hatchery, I got the lowdown from the production team on how much waste would be produced. And it was going to be quite a significant amount. It was going to end up being about 3 tankers to 4 tankers a week. Again, South Sheehan, which is a processing plant which has 1 tanker a week. So we had to find another avenue for it. So we contacted a few companies who dealt with waste, one of them being Rock Highlands, stroke Avanti. We then went out to Norway as their guests to have a look at a couple of plants that they'd done out over Norway for the same sort of idea with the hatchery. And from that, we formulated a plan that actually the product or the waste that we would have would become a product. So we inject polymer into it, aerate it, give it time to do its work, and the polymer binds all the waste together. You can then extract the water using a belt filter from the sludge, and then the farmer uses it with his tractor and his trailer and spreads it over into the farm, and then that produces a beautiful fertiliser. And because it's got nutrients in it, nitrogen, potassium and potash. Avanti take samples of it, send it to the lab just to make sure that the content of the sludge is consistent. And then they also take soil samples from their fields that they're injecting to make sure that they're not overloading the fields. We tried a local farmer here. He was very interested in it as well. The farmer could come in his own trail and his own tractor, go 2 miles down the road, spread it in his field, and it would have been a beautiful situation to be in. But unfortunately, the West Coast does not have the soil to make up as the East Coast does, so it doesn't lend itself to the same nutrients. We have looked at pelleting or bagging as a dry matter, but so far the energy required to take it from basically an 84% water solution down to a 20% water solution, the energy required, it just doesn't make it viable. And we're currently looking at a different plant where the plant could take various wastes and create heat from that waste, basically burn it, which then could power a turbine to make electricity. The other thought is to use that heat to create a drying room to take chips. So take raw scrub and trees and chip it to the right size, dry it on site, and then use that to feed our own biomass plant, which then helps us with the fish on the side. So it's like a continuous cycle.
That was Ewan Leslie from Scottish Sea Farms. What do you see for the future of the industry, say 10, 20 years down the line? Are there plans to grow? Do you see yourselves changing and being able to meet more sustainable targets? Clara?
Well, I think, as we've discussed in the last 15, 20 minutes from Steve talking how things were 50, 40 years ago to how they are now, the advances that we've seen are huge. The industry is almost unrecognisable to what it used to be, and those changes are ongoing. Everything is continually developing and always looking for a better alternative. So I have no doubt that we'll continue to progress, and the way the industry is now will be different in 10 years' time, and I think it will be for the better.
And Steve, you've seen so much change over your career. Where do you think things are heading for fish farming? Will we see a bit more offshore living?
Well, it's quite interesting, because when we started to look at these offshore sites, we thought that our staff would have to live on the barges. But communities were very welcoming and saying, well, look, why don't you live on the island? And as has been said before, houses have been built. It's been great for the company, it's been great for the local communities, and hopefully that will go from strength to strength. But I think as for living on them, the conditions that farm staff would have to put up with certain times of the year, I think that's a tough call.
A final word to you, Clara. You are living in these communities now. What's life like? You must be very, very involved in that community, given the number of people living there.
Yeah, this year has been quite difficult with COVID. We've obviously been quite separate from the community. We've had that in mind. But, from my experience of living and working on muck, it was amazing. I had an absolute ball. The community there were so welcoming to everyone who worked for Maui, and you really had a sense of feeling like you were at home when you weren't at home. You were away at work, but you felt like you were part of a community, and that's a really special thing. And as for living on the barge, I'm not sure if I would be that keen. But there are places in the world, I think in Canada, there are sites where people live on the barge, and the level of accommodation that's provided there looks incredible. So never say never. I think that's something that we all have learned from working in this industry, that things change quickly and they're always evolving. So who knows what the future might hold.
Never say never. Clara McGee, a trainee manager on a salmon farm in Rum. And you also heard how retired Stevie Bracken helped kick off farming in Scotland just as the industry was getting going in the 70s. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I think it's amazing to hear of the scale of salmon farming and the logistics involved. And to me, it's been really inspiring to hear about the constant innovation in that sector. Today's podcast is brought to you, as always, by the team here at Scene and Heard, and is supported this week by the Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation.